as I was introduced, my name's Anthony. I run Joomla Bamboo from here in Melbourne. My experience with Joomla was really just sort of primarily as a user. I'm a trained acupuncturist. I was practicing as an acupuncturist from about 2001 to 2005. Got to a point where I needed to basically create my own website, and I started to investigate the various platforms out there, and came across Joomla, and basically just got bitten by the Joomla bug. And I started Joomla Bamboo in about 2006, and it's just become increasingly a full-time project. I've got a couple of developers that work for me, but they're in Brazil and Czech Republic, and we've got support people all around the world. So the reason why I mention all of that is because primarily my interest in Joomla is it's like a curiosity. I really want to investigate how it worked and how to build things. And when I'm designing for Joomla, it's really about trying to figure out what the end user needs and what the end user wants. And so part of the talk today is going to be about the setup and structure of a Joomla template, as well as some new things that have been added to Joomla templating. We've heard a little bit about Bootstrap, but I'm going to be talking about Less, which is a new system, new sort of technology that's being built into a lot of web technologies. All right. I had thought that I would be able to run two screens, but it's not going to work. All right. So today we're going to be covering what is a Joomla template. We're going to look quickly at some tools of the trade, so what do you actually need to edit or create a Joomla template. We're going to look at how to actually troubleshoot what's going on in a template, and then I'll look at Less and Bootstrap in depth and see how those two things work together. So I guess the first question is, can everyone put up their hand who've actually used Joomla? So effectively, everyone in here. Who's edited a Joomla template? Okay, that's pretty good. And who's built a template from scratch before? All right, so that's a good mix. So most of you know that you need some sort of server to run Joomla on. So I use MAMP, but you can use WAMP or XAMPP. You need a CSS editor or a code editor to basically edit your code. Over the last year or so, I've changed up the tools that I use quite a lot. So I've moved to something called Espresso, which is a favourite editor at the moment. And I use that for CSS, for Less, for HTML and PHP. So it's an all-in-one combined system. But I know that a lot of other people use Sublime and Stylize, Codo, and some other tools out there as well. And obviously you need a Joomla installation to be able to work with the template. So one of the challenges I have running my business, particularly for people that knew me as an acupuncturist, is they say, so what are you doing now? What is it that you actually do? And the short response is web design, but that doesn't really cut my day-to-day process. So I find it quite a tricky thing to actually distill into one point or a short sentence that doesn't create this mess of misunderstanding and confusion. Just explaining to someone that about a CMS is I think that's complex enough. So talking about what a Joomla template is to someone who doesn't know about a Joomla template, that's even harder. So the best thing I could think of at the moment is this old saying about the clothes do not maketh the man or the human. And so in the same way, the design does not make the website. I think branding and design behind a website, it says a lot about who you are, doesn't it? And it really helps to portray a message about who you are, but it isn't the message itself. I mean, people can take influence from what the design is, about what the message you're trying to communicate, but ultimately the message is different to the medium that's being used. So, content is separated from the design. around the early 2000s, design information became increasingly separated from the markup. So before that, all design information was actually combined intrinsically with the markup itself. So it was hard to look at the page and determine what was information and what was content and what was design information. So as a part of the Web 2.0 movement in whenever that was, 2004, 2005, there was a massive focus on changing and shifting that so that design became a separate thing. So you can have content sitting underneath design, and the design changes the way that the content is displayed, but it doesn't change the design, the content itself. So the design communicates an intention or mood, but in most cases it isn't the actual message.
In the same way that clothes tell you a lot about the way a person is, but it doesn't really tell you intrinsically who that person is. And in most cases, there's more to somebody than what they're actually wearing.
All right. So a Joomla template is a specially tailored outfit that combines HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, and PHP into a package that you use to clothe your content. So in the same way that you might skin, some people use the analogy of a skin. I think that this is a good analogy. You can have your content, you can change the outfit you're wearing, you put a different template on, and suddenly you've got a new look, or you've got some new functionality in there. All right. So the actual code for a content is for a template is pretty simple. The stock standard templates that come with the default Joomla templates are basically. Let's bring that up here.
So this is a Joomla 3 installation.
Is that big enough? And all of these files basically are what constitutes the template. So we have a core index file.
Maybe I won't get to read that.
One moment.
All right. So we have a core index file which basically interfaces with the CMS.
It looks a lot like a standard web page. It's got a doc type declaration. It's got the head where all of the CSS files and JavaScript files are loaded on a page. And then down here we've got the body where basically the code, the markup is displayed, which interfaces with the database of Joomla. And around that we have various CSS files that hold all of the information, the design information that relates to the actual markup, that relates to the markup in the template as well as the CMS itself.
And we have images that might be used in the template. We have HTML overrides, which basically override the actual output from Joomla itself. So these files are used to change the way that the core Joomla output is made, and the template has the ability to change and manipulate that.
And we have a language file and possibility of a JavaScript file. So the template itself is not incredibly complex. I mean, there are some complex templates out there, but at its most simple, the template is really just a collection of PHP snippets, a few PHP snippets, a little bit of markup and CSS, and the Joomla basically does all the rest in terms of providing the content.
All right. So
one of the big things, one of the most important things when it comes to actually working with templates, from either editing them or building them yourself, is trying to figure out where stuff's coming from. On our forum, we're constantly trying to help people locate the source of an issue, whether it's a template issue, whether it's a Joomla issue, or whether it's coming from somewhere else. And one of the easiest ways to find out where a file is being included is via the source code of the actual page that's being rendered. So if we go up to this page, and we can go and view the source. And this is in less mode, so it's you can see a stack of files there. We can basically see the pathways to each file and see what is actually being included on the page, and it will give us an idea of how to go about finding a solution. We look at the source all the time. Use Firebug or the WebKit inspector. So in the same way, it's similar to actually just looking at the source. We just click on inspect the element. We can look at the actual files that are being loaded. And it will give us a rundown of the images, the CSS files, anything that's missing. We see that there's a custom CSS file that's missing in that template. We can see the images that are being involved. If you're kind of looking at why the site's loading so slowly, and you look at the images and you've got an image that's 1 meg there, then that gives you a really good idea of how to improve that.
The inspector can be used for quite a lot of stuff, including JavaScript errors, and we've got one there, I'm not sure what that is, and showing missing files. And we use that as a go-to place in order to, like, if there's some JavaScript issue that's happening on a site, the first thing we do is click on inspect the element, click on the console, and we'll see what's going on there. And even if we don't understand it, it gives us an idea of what file is actually causing it. I think one of the complexities of something like Joomla is that there are so many files being included and so many different things to look at that it can be a bit bewildering trying to actually figure out what's causing the issue.
All right, so we did that one. Use CSS edit. This was
my favourite tool. It's just a really visual way of understanding what's going on a page. You can see here if you click on an element, you get the X-ray that highlights the actual markup, and we can see the actual the pathway in the DOM for the actual markup that's being loaded there. We also get an idea of margin, so we can see that there's a 20 pixel margin attached to that div.
You see there's no padding there, there's a little bit of padding there, and what you can do with CSS edit is basically
just go in and edit files on the fly. And I know that there are a ton of different tools for this. This is the best one that I've found. And let's say we want to remove that padding there. Basically, we would write grid to wrap, because that's the parent div on the Zen container. And we would write padding 0, and it will just basically isolate and remove that padding. You can then save a file and suddenly you fixed your issue with the padding or the margin. I'll talk a little bit later about how less changes this in Joomla 3. But I think if you're starting out or you're just trying to figure out how to actually edit or find an issue, getting some sort of visual tool is really important, and some X-ray inspector like this is very good. Espresso has an X-ray inspector, and I think there's some PC apps that are like Stylizer that does it. Is anyone else using a PC app that has a similar functionality? No? Everyone's on Macs.
It's got a visual layout like that.
It doesn't give you the visual, but it gives you, so you'll see all your code as it comes up, and it'll actually display things for your code cuts.
Right.
Otherwise, you've got to go to the firmware.
Yeah, right. And no one wants to do that.
The font's always so small on that. All right. Keeps losing my place. And this is something I resort to a little bit too often. If I can't find where an issue's coming from on a page, I basically start randomly editing and changing the files of changing the names of files or folders. It seems ludicrous that I've been working with Joomla for 6 years, but still sometimes that is the quickest way to actually figure out if it's that file that's being included or not. And this is mainly with PHP files. I often write a little hello at the top, or somewhere in the code, so I can see that that's actually being included. Sometimes it's easier to do that rather than track through a developer's code to see which files are actually being included. We use that a lot for templates, really, because let's see if I can figure something out here.
Yeah, I don't have a good example of that. But basically, if you start renaming folders in the template, then you can quickly rule out the template as an influence. So if we go here...
Oh. Okay. Is it? Great. So basically, if we go here and rename the CSS folder, and then reload the page,
waiting. Oh, that's actually the wrong page. Hang on a sec.
All right, let's try another one, because it's loading less at the moment. It's not actually loading the CSS files. And talk and 30. Did I get something wrong there?
This is obviously going to be the highlight of the talk.
All right, so that's the default protostar template.
And if we rename the CSS folder
and reload the page, we'll basically get the page without the CSS. So that's a one-step process to see if the issue is actually being caused by the template. It doesn't work as well with CSS. It tends to work better with PHP files. So, and in particular with a template, just renaming the HTML folder, because if there's anything that's gone awry in a template from a PHP point of view, the HTML folder is primarily the place that you need to look, either to rule out the template or rule it in as an issue. So it's a pretty helpful thing when you're developing.
Let's rename it properly.
Okay, so let's move on from this one.
All right.
Has anyone heard of less or used less in a project?
You guys have? Nobody else? Any have? You play with it? Yeah. I've actually, to be honest, I've only just really learnt it myself in the last 6 weeks. I heard about it whenever it came out a year ago, and I was thinking, well, I can see the benefit. I felt like a little bit like an old dog. I didn't really want to, waste a lot of time trying to develop a system, that I could use in my templates. I was very happy with CSS Edit. I could just quickly write and see what I was coding on the screen. So I came to it a little bit with a little bit of resistance, but the main reason why I'm using it now is basically because it's a core part of Joomla 3. It's in terms of the templating and interfacing with Bootstrap. I think it's as you'll see, it's a really useful tool, and it's an interesting tool. And yeah, I mean, it's let's talk about it for a little bit. So what is Less? Less is basically a programmatic CSS language. So it's a way to use the logic that you might find in JavaScript or PHP and then apply it to CSS.
And we'll get into, I'm going to do a full demo of it in a little bit. So, and as the name suggests, it means that the developer ends up having to write less code. When I first heard that, I thought, oh, maybe that means that there's less code being output, but there's probably a little bit more code that's actually output in the page. But as you'll see, the actual format of writing less code is actually pretty logical, and it is certainly provides a lot of shortcuts. So with less, you can use variables, which are basically single values that you assign to a variable that is then used throughout the less file. You can use mixins, which are multiple or complex variables that are triggered by a shortcut in the less file.
You can use nested rules, and this is where the writing less code is, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And you can use more complex logic-based things like taking a colour and multiplying it by, or adding it to another colour to create a new colour. I'll give you a demo of that in a second as well.
So this is just a basic screen. There we go. All right. Okay.
Now, in order to use less, you need a program that will do what's called compiling the page. It will compile the code. There are a few different options out there. At the moment, I'm using something called CodeKit, which is a Mac app. And basically, you drop your project files on there. It will scan through, and it basically listens to see if the file's been changed. If the file's been changed upon save, it will then process it to see if there are any errors, and then it will trigger a refresh in the browser. There's a similar app called Live Reload, which is for Mac and PC. I've got that recently, but I'm I'm in two minds about whether I should use that one or this one. You can do some fancy stuff by using the terminal to process and compile less. And I believe a Sublime Text is also able to do the same. Does anybody else use a different compiler for less? All right. So basically, this file can sit in the background here.
And let's have a look at the actual markup of that page. It's pretty simple. We've got a CSS file that's being included in the page. We have a basic wrapper div. We've got a header around an H1, a paragraph, and a read more link. Okay, so that's what you're seeing over there. In order for less to work, all you need to do is dump less files inside a folder called less, and it will automatically compile to a folder called CSS in the same folder structure. So basically,
what we have here, this is actually an unlessified less file, so you can see what we have here on the page, and you can see how CodeKit works. We'll just change the background color there. So it's just basically injecting the changes to the file real time.
And so all I'm doing is just basically saving it, so we can change this to 100,
change it back.
All right. And so this is just CodeKit using CSS and HTML. It's not actually using the less just yet. So let's have a look here. So we'll grab some basic variables.
And we need to, I'll tell you about this. So the template.less file is the actual file that gets referenced and generates the template.css file that is ultimately included on the page. You can see up here we've imported a file called variables.less. So at the moment that's blank, but this is where we're going to store our variables. So I'll just dump 4 variables there and save the file. And CodeKit has helpfully told me that those variables actually aren't defined just yet.
So we can see I've referenced black, which is a variable.
Let's go down here and we'll write black, and we'll make black that color.
And we need to also create a variable for white,
1, 2, 3. We save it, and CodeKit says, yep, that's okay. We'll process that.
Now, it's still not outputting on the page because we haven't used that variable in the template.less file. So let's grab, let's grab body color as the variable.
Go over here and add that as the color for the background.
So it'll be the same color because we've assigned it there. So let's change it, the color black to white.
And hopefully that's not working. 1, 2, 3.
And body color. I did test this just before, so I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. What's happened here? Just thinking about loading. The machine's freaking out a little bit. So you can imagine what would happen if it actually worked. You'd be able to see it in action. What's going on here? The fan on my laptop started up, so something's obviously at work here.
Let's shut CodeKit down. Yeah, there we go.
Which is helpful because all of my
windows are closed now. Alright, here we go. So let's change, so we changed the body color, we'll go to the variables, assign the body color as white again, click save, and there we go. So basically what we're doing is we're substituting the actual hex value for the body, for the background as a variable, and we're just changing the variable file. We've covered that one. So the next thing on the list that Les can do is actually use things called mix-ins, which are actually much more complex groupings of variables. So again, we'll stick this in the variable, in the variables file. You can see that the border mix-in consists of a 4-pixel solid color using the text color, and it has the color white. So we'll just change it so we can actually see it. And in order to drop that color into, or that mix-in into a code, all you need to do is
specify a border, and suddenly we've got a border there.
And we can go in here and say, okay, let's make this,
give it a bit of space around it. We'll change the color. Rather than using a variable, we'll just use the color red, and so forth. So you can see how, well, I hope you can see, when this comes into to Joomla, as we'll find in a little bit, accessing the actual core bootstrap values is actually pretty simple. It's real, it's complex when you first look at it and you say, oh, what are these files and what's all this code? But as soon as you start breaking it down and start using less, it actually becomes a lot more easier to navigate and to understand what's happening. You can also pass an argument to a mix-in. Well, I should actually show you what's being generated here as well. So when you change a variable
here, so what have we got? We've got in the CSS file we have background as 333. If we change it over here, that hasn't actually been updated. We have to open it separately. We have. You can see that the background in the actual file is what it is in the less file.
So mix-ins with more complex
arrangement. So mix-ins that actually allow you to pass a variable like this border radius.
In order to use that, all we need to do is drop this in here, and we'll say, let's look at our page again. Let's change this back to black.
And we'll give this a background as well, so we can actually see what's happening. Background. And now if we save that, we'll see that the header has a blue background. We will then drop in the border radius mix-in. And let's check the spelling on that. And let's say we want a 20 pixel border radius around that. Then you can see here, you can see that we've added a 20 pixel border radius just around that element. And that is basically all just from this variable file.
If we want to change the border radius, it's as simple as doing this. And so we can just basically go through and make some really discrete changes to the code to change the appearance. And that is then reflected in the rest of the template. So you don't have to do a search for where every instance of a border radius is in a CSS file. It's just a matter of changing the one mix-in, or the one place where that mix-in is referenced, and suddenly you're able to fine-tune the rest of it. And here we go with, this is a mix-in from Bootstrap itself. So we're going to stick this in the variables file, and we'll grab this code. This is the actual trigger for that. So let's, where can we add that? Let's add this here. And we'll remove this. So this is we're going to create a vertical gradient, and we'll do it with something that's a little bit easier to see. So it's creating a new gradient is really, really, really simple. Change it to that. You can then use the actual primary variables that we've got in the other file, and so forth. We want to change it to a horizontal gradient. It's just a matter of changing that syntax, and suddenly we've got a horizontal gradient. So I don't know if you've ever tried to create CSS3 gradients before, but it's often a bit bewildering, even if you're using an online tool where you get to specify the colours. It's complex, and actually fine-tuning it is really hard. Whereas this way, it's a matter of just using two values, using the built-in Bootstrap mix-in, and then fine-tuning it as you go. And the beauty of using less if you're compiling in real time is that you get to play with it in real time. I think one of the disadvantages, or one of the impediments to really understanding the workflow in building templates is if you have to refresh the page all the time. If it takes too long to actually see the results of your change, like particularly if you're working in a remote server in Australia, sometimes the page loads can be like 4 seconds, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure you've experienced the frustration where you make a change, that didn't work, you make the change, that didn't work, and suddenly you've wasted 5 minutes doing something. Whereas this, admittedly we're working locally, this is very simple. It's do this, save, do this, save. It's very, very quick and a lot more efficient. I think that was all I was going to talk about there.
If that seemed a little bit too complex, or you're not sure how that actually relates to the work that you're going to do changing Joomla 3 templates, that's just a real bit of background. But this next step is really just showing you how Less is integrated with Bootstrap and how Bootstrap is integrated in Joomla.
And I'm pretty sure you couldn't go to a Joomla conference anywhere around the world in the last 12 months and not hear about Bootstrap. So I'm quite glad that Max has done this, so I don't even really need to talk about it. I guess Norm asked me before whether Bootstrap was a framework. And in my research, I was trying to, the people have got different ideas about whether Bootstrap is actually a framework or not. But at its loosest, I really think that whether you call it a framework or not, it's basically a set of tools. And Brian mentioned the toolkit. It's a set of tools that you know as a developer that sits inside Joomla that you can access. So you don't necessarily have to use all of it or much of it, but you know that it's there. So it's like a toolkit. You just go, oh, okay, I need a gradient for this element. Let's create a gradient. And I just showed you how to do that. I won't look at the Bootstrap website. All right, the pros of, I don't know if you've read, it's fascinating reading, but on the Joomla mailing lists recently, there was a big discussion about the legitimacy of having Bootstrap in Joomla itself. Even though the decision was made to put Bootstrap in, well over a year ago, there was a bit of a reaction recently about it, and some very strong, passionate views about it. So I think Bootstrap has a lot going for it, and the fundamental thing that it has for me is that it creates, as a template designer, is it has a consistent, it means that the CMS is going to be more consistent. So you can drop, if your template is utilizing Bootstrap, any other extension that also uses Bootstrap should look good in the template. If you remember back to Joomla 1 or Joomla 1.5, this was not always the case, and often when you're quoting for a job, you'd have your template, that's $1,000 or whatever you're charging, and then they want community builder, that's another $1,000, they want a forum component, that's another $1,000, and maybe having Bootstrap's actually cutting into your budget a bit, but it actually means that your customers and your clients can be assured of having a more consistent, cohesive website. And one of the things that really, I think, smacks in terms of cheapness from a design point of view is when different pages have different UI elements and there's no consistent user interface across the design. And I think that's a fundamental thing in terms of being able to create a professional Joomla product. The other thing that Bootstrap is good for is it's good for building templates quickly, once you learn it, obviously. It's constantly being worked on, so there's a real, there's a massive community around the world that are using Bootstrap and basically adding fixes and making changes and adding functionality. So I think it's a good thing for us to be using Bootstrap from that end. You can create any type of site with Bootstrap. One of the, as you'll see in the cons, one of the negatives that is said about Bootstrap is that most Bootstrap sites look like Bootstrap sites. And as a developer or a designer, I think in a lot of cases, if I see a site, I say, oh, I think that's Bootstrap, and you have a look at the code, and sure it is. But I think if that's the main argument about why not to use Bootstrap, because all Joomla 3 sites will look the same, I think that the designers are essentially being a little bit lazy, and they're not actually using Bootstrap in the way it was intended. Bootstrap is really just a framework, and the design ideas sit on top of that. Sure, think there are going to be similar elements involved, but if you spend a lot of time on the design, then there's no reason why it should just look like every other Bootstrap site. The other thing is that we have most of the core Joomla 3 functionality like tabs, sliders, and those sort of effects are now run by either jQuery or Bootstrap, which is included inside Bootstrap. So it means as a template developer, if I'm including the core Bootstrap assets, I know very easily what markup to use in order to generate a tabbed interface, for instance. And I'll show you in a little bit later on this free template that I had hoped to release this week, but will end up being next week, which uses Bootstrap styling like modals and tabs as actual module chromes. So you'll be able to use specify that as in the module settings. All right. So the cons for using Bootstrap are that it's bloated. Like if you look at the file, there's a ton of stuff in there that
you may not ever use. And I think this, in some respects, this is an okay criticism of it. But if you were building bespoke web designs that you've got complete control over the code, when you use the CMS, it's necessarily a compromise. Like, if you were building static websites, of course you would cut down the bootstrap file and you would cut out things that you weren't going to use. But the CMS is different because it's got a whole range of functionality that is being used to tap into the other extensions may be used to maybe tapping into it. So the fact that Bootstrap uncompressed is 200 kilobytes as a CSS file. That's an issue if you're a hardcore web geek. Of course, you don't want to have 150k of unused CSS, but in terms of using it with the CMS, I think that that is actually a kind of acceptable compromise, because you don't know what your client's going to install and what other extension used on the site is going to require that stuff. As Peter mentioned the other day, you shouldn't complain about that because we've ripped mootools out anyway. So it's like we're not actually adding 200k to the actual load. It's Joomla 3 has a much more improved asset base, so you're not actually loading more code.
One of the big arguments against using Bootstrap is that the design is too tightly coupled to the structure. So there are two elements to that. The first one is that it's hard to override. So if you want to change things about a button or a certain element on the page, there's a lot of resetting that you need to do. So you need to strip out some of the text shadow that's applied to active links in a sidebar, for instance. There are a lot of designs that shouldn't necessarily have a text shadow on it. So there are all these little fine-grained things that you have to look through and basically rip out. In my latest template, I've got a mixin called reset, which is just, so as you saw, it's when I want to reset something, I just type .reset and it basically nulls the padding, the margin, the box shadow, the text shadow, any other element and the background as well. So I can basically look at an element and just reset it and then start from scratch.
One of the big things is basically that people think that Bootstrap is non-semantic.
So a semantic class is really something that tells the user or the browser what the element is rather than what it looks like. So in the example of a read more, a semantic class for a read more button is class equals read more, whereas in Bootstrap it's class equals button. So to my mind, it sort of tells you a little bit what it is. You read more, you're going to click on it, you click on buttons like this. It's not a massive leap, but it's not a pure semantic description of what a read more should be. And then I mentioned all Bootstrap sites look the same. Ultimately, I think Bootstrap for Joomla is about compromise. It's not a perfect solution. It's certainly open. It's certainly able to be improved, but I think it's the best thing that we have at the moment. I'm quite excited about what will happen in Joomla 4, for instance, and see how implementation of this CSS framework is realised. I've got no idea how we're going for time, do you?
15 minutes.
All right. So basically, in the same way that you saw the less project that I was working with, Bootstrap is basically. Let's bring this up. Might be a little bit better.
Bootstrap is compiled with less files. So if we look at the Protostar template,
where did you go to? Is that it? Yeah.
So in the same way that my little project had a template.less file and a variables file, Protostar also has that. And you can see how it's in that file it includes all of the dependencies for Bootstrap. Those files are located back here in the media JUI less folder. And if you open up that file, you can see that it's a short, basic grouping of less code that relates to that particular functionality. So that's the accordion functionality. This is the core CSS that basically applies the collapse function that you see, or the slider function that you see in the Joomla 3 backend. We scroll down through there, and so there are a lot of files there. We scroll down and we see in this particular template we have some more CSS, which is added on top of Bootstrap. If we remove that, then we would basically end up just having a pretty plain Bootstrap looking page. This is the stuff that goes on top of Bootstrap to make ProtoStyle look like it is. So, which is this one. And, I mean, the first time I looked at this, I had no idea what was going on. So it was really good writing this talk, actually, so I can really figure it out for myself. But basically, every time, what's happening here is that Bootstrap uses less to compile CSS files based on a variable file. So pretty much the same file that I used in my demo project. The template includes the Bootstrap less files that then generates the Bootstrap CSS file. So if we go back here, the template is including all of these less files and then generating this file. What's that? Basically by a compiler. The less compiler then translates the less file and then creates the CSS file.
On the web server?
Yeah. Not on the fly, no. Oh, so did you say it was on the fly? No. Yeah, and so that's one of the benefits of less is it's not going to affect the front end performance at all, unless you're using, like I'll show you in a second, that you can use some templates that load less files directly. So you can, that's basically where the less is being generated dynamically. But one of the beauties of it is that you click save or you compile to less, and suddenly it's the CSS file is being created.
So ultimately, a CSS file is still being loaded by the browser?
Yeah.
So if you want to try and edit that inline, it's not starting.
Yeah, and so that's the point. I don't know if you heard it, but Norm said if you actually want to edit that file, how do you go about it? And this was the thing that confused me when I first looked at Bootstrap. I'd get it open and use the techniques I showed you in the start about how to look at a file and see what's happening. And I had no idea how to actually negotiate that. I just want to change the button color. Surely that's simple. I can just go in and change the rule. So it requires a little bit of a change in focus around that. So let's bring up this again. In order to change the button color, for instance, it's simply a matter of going to the variables file. Actually, let's change the link color because it's a little bit easier.
Which rule is being affected? Most of the variables are pretty obvious. A link color is, that describes, that's a pretty good description of what's happening. The font family is, that's another good description. But at this stage, I still chase my tail sometimes, going, well, where is that style coming from specifically? And I think that's a bit of a downfall in that, if you try and look at it inline or try and look at the CSS, the fact that it's just one big file, it's problematic because the CSS rules are basically overridden, once, twice, maybe 3 times throughout that file. So
do you not necessarily upload the less files to the server?
I guess you don't need to if you're not going to develop on the server, but
No. I'll refer to my panel. Do we do that or not? No.
It sounds like to me it's adding a step. That's what I
to development. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to change the link color.
let's,
10 minutes, Anthony.
oh, has it gone up? No.
Alright, let's drop Protostar on there. Actually, it's already in.
Let's reload this.
Alright. Actually, maybe I've got the wrong file there. Yeah.
Can you spend a few minutes covering what you're planning to do with your how you're creating bootstrap?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about that in a second. I've got a couple of slides lined up.
I'll just try and see what's happening here.
There we go. Okay, so changing the link color on in the Joomla template is really just as simple as changing the variable file again. So, sorry guys.
So I guess Noel's question is a good one, you know, or observation. It adds an extra step, and for a developer who wants to go in and own absolutely everything in the code, then I totally agree with you. For an end user that wants to customize or edit the template just by changing some basic stuff, then this is pretty simple. You can change the. Let's change that to. Let's get rid of Helvetica there.
Georgia, I mean. Let's add Georgia back in. Oh, it's a little error. Did I write the wrong thing?
And there we go. So we've changed the font. So from an end user point of view, I think that this is, well, I guess there are 3 degrees of users. There's a hardcore developer, there's someone that likes to tinker, and then there's somebody that likes a user interface. This in itself is actually more aimed at the person in the middle, I think. But what's basically happening here is that when we save the variable file, the CSS file back here is being rewritten. So I won't open it up because it'll be hard to see. But we should see that it's the date stamp is just just a couple of minutes ago. So basically, the less compiler. No, it's not. Where are we? Well, I'm not sure what's happened there. It should be. So the less compiler basically generates the CSS file that then gets loaded onto the page. Yeah.
Those existing less files that are part of that template, when updates might arise from the template builder,
Yeah.
manufacturer, if you want to call it that way, when they have updates, sometimes maybe some of that CSS would be changed as well.
Yep.
And wouldn't that override your changes to that template?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're.
That's certainly one option, and I think for changing small things, then maybe or large things, using a custom CSS file is certainly one option. But if you don't overwrite the variables file, then you're going to save everything. So this is like a master document for the template. So if you don't overwrite the variables, then you won't lose your particular things. But you can. If you let's say that the variables file is actually going to be overwritten in the update, you can just import another custom variables file, which will basically do the same thing. Thank you. All right, so let's.
All right. So I had hoped. I was asked just before and a couple of times what's happening with our templates and Bootstrap. Basically. About 6 weeks ago, I made a decision to drop our framework. We developed the ZenGrid framework in favour of T3.
I had, during the development of the Joomla 3 version of a framework, I had it up and running and it was looking very, very nice. but not nice enough. And I had a look at the T3 framework, and I was really just blown away by what it can do in terms of what it adds to usability for end users. This is a template that is built on Bootstrap. I think you'll agree it doesn't really look anything like all the classic Bootstrap websites that you might see.
Maybe it does. Ooh. Let's go into the administrator here.
And T3's got a number of cool things in it. I'll quickly look at this. It has a very visual layout controller, a layout editor, which enables you to give like full flexibility on how many modules you have on a particular row, as well as the name of the actual module. So if you don't like the module positions that ship with a template, you can just create your own module positions or move them around. It's got a really great focus on responsive layouts. Previously, in our ZenGrid templates, we would have to dive deep into media queries to create this sort of flexibility. But basically, you can just drag and drop, or not drop, just drag.
And change the layout. So that's on a wide screen. For that particular row, we'd have that width configuration.
You drop down to normal screen. So we push it down to 2 rows.
Tablets, you can change again, and obviously on the mobiles. If you don't want a particular module to show on a mobile, you just disable it here. And so it gets the core Bootstrap class, which is phone hide or hidden phone. It's got a killer mega menu, which is just going to blow most people away when it's
available.
No, this is T3.
This is T3?
Yep.
What's the overhead with T3?
It's really low. That was one of the big.
Yeah, T3. I never actually used it in a live situation, but I often had.
What's that? No. I often had feedback from people saying that it's very slow, but T3 version 3 is completely rewritten, and even though it's got all this kind of awesome back-end stuff, which is like this thing called theme magic, it's actually really fast on the front end. So with theme magic, you can edit the site non-destructively from the back end, changing parameters, and this all happens via less again. So basically, we're changing a parameter here. We'll go to the appearance, we'll change the primary colour, which in this template is, actually the primary colour is not on page. We'll change the secondary colour, click preview, you'll see over here we've got this change here.
We can change buttons, text colour, the works, and I just added this so we can change the background opacity on that that element up the top here. So you can see it got a bit darker,
and we can also link
less variables in there. So if you go back here, primary is set as that colour, and so this is a user interface that's basically looking at less and putting it into a really user-friendly visual representation. And I think that was.
Yeah, that's right. And then so with theme magic, you can also
try out the different themes and preview it in the real time. This theme is pretty minimal in terms of the colours that change. Yeah, certainly all 2.5 templates will be made compatible with T3. As I said, next week, I'm going surfing for a week next week, so I'm not sure if it's going to happen. But there's a template that's due out called ZenBase, which will be available on GitHub, and it's just a free version of this. It's a lot like our Blanco template that I released last year. and that'll be freely available. So you'll be able to basically get T3 into your hands and basically, create whatever you like, be creative as you like.
So I think that's time. So thanks.